Shana Tova and Shabbat Shalom. Jewish tradition tells us that the gates of heaven are open wide and will remain so for the next 10 days. As Rosh Hashanah begins, I imagine the orange and red hues of sunset shining through those open gates. I can picture the blues and purples of dusk giving way to a starlit sky that goes on forever. That image of the open gates stands in stark contrast to the reality of our world right now. A world whose doors and gates and windows have been shuttered for much of this year. We are living in a time of isolation, when the celebration of grand moments in our lives had to be altered or canceled. We are living in times when the people most in need of visits and human contact are often cut off from the exact thing that they crave. Our holiday tables have not been crowded as they once were, and our sacred space, this sanctuary where I stand, has not been full for a very long time. Last year at this time, this sanctuary was full. I saw so many of you in person, and I could sense the hope inside each and every one of our hearts for a good and sweet new year. Just 1 year ago, there was not even the slightest shred of doubt in my mind that we would return to this very place the following year to celebrate in person once again. There are likely very few of us who ended up where we thought we would be on this Rosh Hashanah. I'm a big believer that each of us has agency in our own lives. So usually on the high holidays, I set goals for myself. I picture where I will be in a year from now, and I think of all the actions which will be required of me to get there. At the end of the year, if I fall short of my goals, if I'm not where I wanted to be physically, spiritually, or emotionally, the first direction I look is inward. What have I done? What behaviors have I picked up? What habits did I create that led me to fall short of my goals? Even in a year like this, I still believe that we have influence over where we wind up in life. But 5780 has been an important reminder that while we can control a great deal, we cannot control it all. In this past year of 5780, many of us have suffered loss like people do every single year. But this past year was profoundly different. Human beings always encounter grief, irritability, anger, sadness. But this year, we were unable to fully control how we coped with such feelings. We had no choice but to be more isolated than we would have wanted to be in such trying times. The same is true of our grandest moments. Graduations, promotions at work, baby namings, b'nai mitzvah, weddings. All of these huge life moments, achievements that we had envisioned years in advance, that just a year ago seemed to be right on track, now were completely altered or canceled altogether. Our ancient tradition has a word for moments like these, a word for both good and bad moments when the reality of our world is different than what we were striving for. That word is chet. If you look up the word chet in the Hebrew English dictionary, you will find the English words sin or transgression. You may have even in your lifetime described part of the high holidays in this way. Oh yes, Yom Kippur, the day that we atone for our chata'im, we atone for our sins. But this is a case when a key element of a Hebrew word, chet, gets lost in translation. In English, when we think of sin or transgression, we have a negative association. We have associations of guilt and shame. But in the Hebrew, chet, at least in its origin, is less associated with these kinds of negative emotions. The Hebrew root of chet, spelled with the Hebrew letters chet, tet, aleph, is actually an archery term. It means to miss the target. Just as an archer aims for the bullseye but does not always hit that target, so too for thousands of years, the Jewish people have aimed to hit our targets. But there is no shame in missing the mark. Jewish tradition anticipates that we will miss. So each year, we have these days of awe, the Yamim Hanoraim, to reevaluate and to try again. 10 days from now, when we confess our sins and say our al chetz, there is a custom of making a fist and beating our chests. For those who follow this ritual, our fist makes contact with our chest as we say, Al chet shechatanu lefanecha, for the sin we have committed before you. But this year, the last thing we need is to beat ourselves up even more. We don't need to give ourselves a harder time about all the ways in which we missed the bullseye. Because let's face it, so much of what happened to us this year was not our fault. So much of this is out of our control. So every year, but this year in particular, I want to encourage you, if you follow this physical ritual, that instead of beating your chest, you might come to see this exercise as more of a massage of the heart. Sure, maybe we need a little clunk every now and again to remind us that we should try and be less irritable, more patient, or perhaps more mindful of others. But this year, we as a community and we as a world are in deep need of rachamim, compassion, as we begin the year 5781. We are in need of compassion because this brand new year is one in which we are going to mourn. We will mourn the loss of loved ones, and we will mourn the loss of goals we tried to achieve. We will mourn the loss of routines that we took for granted, the perfect sports season, or the habit of sitting in your favorite coffee shop, the big role in the school play, or walking your child all the way to their classroom at drop-off, senior prom, a dream vacation, or even getting together with friends and family. We have to let go of these things for now. We have to become comfortable with where we are and with who we have to be in this moment. We must do this for ourselves, for our family, for our community. If we don't do this, once the gates of heavens close and we hear the sound of the shofar, we are in danger of spending all of 5781 lamenting where we are not, instead of accepting and perhaps even finding the beauty in where we are. There is a story about Rabbi Jacob Kranz, known as the Magid of Dubno. He was famous for his parables. He was once asked how his stories always hit the proverbial bullseye. The Magid answered that there are two ways to be a great archer. One way is to set up a target, aim for that target, shoot the arrow and hit it. But one needed to have a very rare skill for that. What the great Maggid of Dubno did, he said, was first he would take his arrow, aim it, and shoot. He would go find wherever it landed, and he would paint a target around that arrow. That is how he always hit the target. For the Maggid of Dubno, this is how he was able to articulate such amazing stories. First, he identified the parable, the lesson he wanted to teach, and then he would paint a story around that parable. Last year at this time, so many of us were poised to be the archer with the rare skill. For many of us, the world was such that we were able to set our target wherever we wanted, and then we would shoot toward that very spot with a very high likelihood of accuracy. But here we are, 1 year later, and so much has changed. This year, it is time to embrace the skill of the great Maggid of Dubno. The arrows that took flight towards our targets last year, they needed to make emergency landings. Not only did they miss the bullseye, they were forced to miss the target altogether. Our arrows are in the ground, with the original target out of sight. So what are we going to do? Will we lament our chata'im? Will we bemoan our inability to reach our targets? Or will we begin to paint our bullseyes around the arrows? This is not a year for beating our chests. This is not a year for affliction. We've had enough of that. This year, we should massage our hearts. This is the moment when we need to figure out the meaning and the purpose of who we are and how our arrows have landed where they have. We need to find meaning and purpose, and we need to be there for ourselves. I have the privilege of being alongside many of you in your most joyous and most difficult moments. And I know that so many of us at Beth Or are goal-driven people. I know that many of you have built your lives setting targets and hitting the bullseye dead on time after time. So for a moment, I want to talk to you, the goal setters. Building a target around where the arrow has landed is not taking the easy way out, nor is it a call to throw in the towel this year. In fact, it is a call for us to get to work, and Jewish history can serve as our inspiration. So many pillars of Jewish tradition are actually targets beautifully crafted around unexpected fallen arrows. The Babylonian Talmud, the work upon which so much of Jewish law is based, was the creation of a community exiled from the land of Israel. Babylon was not their target, but they made it a center of learning and culture. Another example is the destruction of the holy temples in Jerusalem. When the second temple fell, the sacrificing of animals as a way of worshiping God came to a complete halt, according to the rabbis. It must have felt to those ancient Israelites like their connection with God was completely severed. While prayer existed in other forms before that point, our prayer services today are a creation that was born out of the reality of being unable to sacrifice animals as a form of worship. Our prayer services today are mapped onto those ancient sacrificial practices in so many ways. Once again, surrounding an arrow that missed a target, something beautiful was created. Fast forwarding 2,000 or so years, Theodor Herzl's dream of building a Jewish nation-state did not come out of thin air. His dream was born out of a realization that the Jews who aimed for the target of full integration into European culture and society, they might hit the target, but according to Herzl, they would never hit the bullseye. Herzl assessed almost prophetically in the late 1800s that no matter how much the Jews of Europe behaved, spoke, or ate like their neighbors, they would never be fully accepted or fully safe. The magnificent project that is the State of Israel was a target built around an arrow that missed the bullseye of assimilation into European culture. Throughout history, the Jewish people have been archers shooting towards our targets. We hit some targets along the way, and we miss some too. And while so much of Jewish history is about great achievement, remember that some of the biggest and most beautiful projects came from missing the bullseye. It was never about taking the easy way out. It was about recovering from a difficult moment, accepting it, and striving towards something new. It is so fitting that this Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbat, because there is a line in Lecha Dodi, the famous Shabbat poem, that perfectly summarizes this mindset, which is so ingrained in the Jewish consciousness and is so crucial for us at this very moment. Rav lach shevet be'emek habacha. Long enough have you dwelt in the valley of tears. The phrase is not telling us we aren't allowed to mourn, but it's saying that we can't dwell there forever. Missing the target is part of life, but there is no shame or guilt in that, especially when it is under circumstances out of our control. There is great pride to be found in aiming and missing, so long as we show resilience and build our new bullseyes. Through this process, amazing and beautiful things can happen. One of the gifts and beauties of being an American Jew is that wherever I find a piece of inspiration in Jewish text and tradition, there always seems to be a parallel found in American history. And a bonus for me personally is that this story happens to be a part of baseball lore as well. A person once told the following story. When I was a small boy in Kansas, a friend of mine and I went fishing. And as we sat there in the warmth of the summer afternoon on a riverbank, we talked about what we wanted to do when we grew up. I told him that I wanted to be a real Major League Baseball player, a genuine professional like Honus Wagner. My friend said that he'd like to be President of the United States. Neither of us got our wish. The person who told that story was a man by the name of Dwight D. Eisenhower, the 34th President of the United States of America. If we hit all of our targets in life, we probably are setting the targets too close. If we hit none of our targets, it may be a sign that we need to make our goals a bit more attainable. And if we are setting our goals just right, we are all the more likely to have some successes each year, but we are also likely to miss. We are likely to commit chata'im. We are likely to miss our targets. We instinctively know what to do when we hit our targets. We celebrate. But the question of this year is, what will we do with the arrows that have fallen short, especially given that they fell by no fault of our own? May we all have the bravery in 5781 to honestly assess where our arrows have landed, and may we have the strength to find beauty in these difficulties. May we have the courage in 5781 to paint new targets. May we create meaning and find fulfillment exactly where we are. Shana Tova and Shabbat Shalom.